And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 231. Today we've got a feedback session. First one in a couple of months, I think, in fact. So, excuse me. Yes, stick around. If you're watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know where you are. Let me know what you're up to. Let me know what the weather's doing. And we can get the chat started. So let's begin. Yes, so welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 231. If you're looking to improve your understanding of photography, well, you're in the right place. So yes, today feedback. I've not done because I had problems with my computer. I just didn't actually trust my computer to actually be able to connect to YouTube and do Photoshop at the same time. So I've been kind of avoiding the feedback sessions, but I'm quite glad to get back into them now because I do tend to feel it's kind of one of the core parts of this podcast. Is what separates this one out from just about anything else. Here you can get live, direct feedback on your actual photos. So, what's this saying? Oh, I've got something up saying my stream rate is a bit low. Not quite sure what to do about that. A bit late to do that anyway. So yes, meanwhile, leave me a comment. And I can see we've got a few in already. So let's just take a little look here. So what have we got? Oh, Adrian said he won't be able to actually join us live because he's off to see his mum and his sister. That's you to let us know though. April says, greetings all from a sunny Long Island, New York. Susan says, hi from Kakubri. A bit of a grey day. Needs some more sunshine. A bit of yours would be great, April. Yeah, it is a bit grey and overcast, not quite as dark as it and dull as it was last week, but yeah, not particularly great. But I am back to a little bit of natural light coming through the window rather than having to stick the lights on. Nadia says hi, all from a cloudy Fife. Nick says hello from a sunny Bath. Oh well, we can import the sun from Bath. Viji says good evening everyone from a pleasant Chennai. And Janet says hi from a cold minus 14 degrees C, feels like minus 20. Mississauga in Canada. Yes, that is cold. I think you win on the cold stakes. Absolutely, Janet. And Meg joins us and says hello, everyone. So, yes, this idea of feedback. So feedback sessions are your place to get genuine feedback on your photos. There are very few places on the internet where you can, or even around the world, where you can get genuine feedback on your images. Certainly not without having to pay for them quite steeply in a lot of cases. The big problem is that most of us, we stick our photos up on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media, and our friends all say, yay, that's great, that's lovely, or they don't say anything at all. And even those who say it's lovely, well, they're being nice. How many of your friends are proper photographers who would be able to give you genuine feedback anyway? And even those who are proper photographers, have you actually asked them specifically for the feedback, or have you just shoved up a photo? Because I've kind of tried to be very careful now of not offering up advice unless I am specifically asked for it, because advice without request is always criticism. And it's worth remembering that if you offer unsolicited advice, it will always be taken as criticism. So the idea, but I mean, my feedback is always constructive, but not everybody's looking for feedback. They shove up a photo because they're pleased with it, not to have somebody come along and say, oh, well, you've got a bit of a distracting element over there. If they're asking for it, it's a different thing. So this is a safe place on the internet to get a little bit of feedback on your photos, where I will give constructive criticism, but criticism or feedback you have asked for. Jeffrey, I think it is, has joined us and said good morning, good afternoon, all. Right, okay. Well, what I'm going to start with is let me spring back here. So we'll make a start. I've had 4 people send in images: Janet and Viji and Nadia, and then I have one left over from Robert, which he actually sort of requested way back at the tail end of 2024, but because I haven't been doing the feedback sessions, I haven't got round to it. So let's make a little start. So where we're going to start with today is actually, just before we get to that, a quick little thing on the Smug Points that, as suspected last week, Nadia did in fact win the Smug Points challenge with 85 points, putting her 25 points ahead of her nearest rivals, which means she gets to choose the challenge for March, which she already has, so I will be telling you about that, so stick around for later when I'll tell you what's coming up this month. Okay, where are we at? Oh, you'll also please, they say never apologise, never explain. I will apologise slightly in advance if I'm slightly slower than usual. I've come down with some kind of weird bug. I've just barely slept for the last 2 nights and I haven't eaten in well over 24 hours. I'm kind of feeling okay enough to do the podcast, but I am aware that my brain is slightly slower. So, but I have had my coffee though. However, meanwhile, if you have questions, if you have comments, anything, make sure you leave them as we go. All right, okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to start with Nadia. So, let's see, I'm going to click on that and we can flip over to there. And Nadia sent in this photo. These lovely duck and chicks. What a lovely bunch of chicks. And I love the way they're all kind of snuggled into each other like that. Nadia says, this is a photo I took with my phone while on holiday. I got as close to them without spooking the mum. I'm struggling with the editing on how to make it pop. Also not sure if the mum needs to actually even be in the picture, as it was the ducklings huddled together that caught my eye. Now, yeah, this is one of those images where, yeah, I mean, you see it. You've got duck, you've got ducklings. Wow, how cute. You've got your phone with you. How close can I get in? And you're just kind of sneaking forward, getting as close as you can, trying not to spook the mother and the ducklings. Because there is a feeling of trying to get in close. Is it about the ducklings? Is it about the mother and the ducklings? Well, there's a thing here whereby you've got in close, but I kind of feel this is one of those where, and I've talked before about this notion of very often photos are either not close enough or not far enough away. And this has that sort of slight feeling to me as well, that in a way, if it's about the ducklings, you wanted to get in closer and you wanted to be more like that. Now, obviously you didn't have that opportunity for that, but you've got the mother. There's a little bit of a gap between them, but there's also a kind of, it feels a bit squashed in. If we look down at there's not a lot of gap at the bottom here. There's a bit more gap at the top. So, given that, let's just open this up in Photoshop, Nadia, and say that what I would be tempted to do really with this, that if you want to keep the mother in, you could maybe just pull that down a bit. But actually, that notion of give it room to breathe, I'd be kind of tempted to have actually just give it a little bit more space around it. Maybe sort of take that one a little bit up. Now I'm going to use generative fill here, or generative expand. Because obviously I don't know how much room you had at the time in order to take the photo. This is just to kind of give you a little bit of a sense that had you maybe come back a little bit and taken the photo, that a little bit more space around them. I know it's that odd thing because you want to kind of get in as close as you can, but at the same time, sometimes if you either need to be in so close that you kind of fill the frame with all these ducklings, and something like that would be wonderful, except for the fact that you're with your phone, and unless you've got some kind of attachment zoom lens, you're never going to be able to do it. As we can see, the quality just isn't there for something like that. But if you were just going to have the ducklings, you see here that little bit of extra space around there makes it, I think you can just about get away with it. Or you include the mother here, and I think that kind of space. Now I can see here you've already sort of vignetted it slightly. So, I mean, this is giving us alternative backgrounds. It doesn't really seem to make a lot of difference which one we choose. If I stick those, actually I suddenly realised I've got the wrong workspace here, so let's put that on there, and now you can see what's going on here. So I've gathered up these onto another layer. And now what you could do, there is a thing whereby if you're trying to draw your attention to something, now there's a number of ways to draw attention. We know all about, well, things like leading lines and what have you, but there is a notion here that once you've got this, that if you can, options here are tone, you can lighten or the area that you're trying to draw attention to compared to the darker and sort of darker. So, if we were to sort of, let's say, take a curves thing here and pull that down a little bit, and then come back in and mask out, I'll put that at something like about 50%. ish, and just kind of bring the duck and ducklings back in. Now, I thought it is kind of maybe the vignette's just a little bit too strong, but there's that. But there's another option here, which is whereby maybe you can add a little bit more texture. So if we take that into, filter, this is me being slow, apologies for this. So we come into here, and maybe if we go to the effects and we add in a bit of texture, a bit of clarity, just and kind of increase that. But the problem is with this now, also the highlights seem to have gone a bit off on that. But let's do that. Now, it tends to do it across the whole picture, and we don't want it across the whole picture. So again, mask it, and then just paint it in where you want it. And maybe what we do is we just kind of paint it in slightly on the chicks. And it's very subtle at this point, but what we're doing is just, we can see that we're just kind of creating a little bit more texture into the sort of fur, well, feathers rather than fur. If that's a little bit overdone, then we can always bring the opacity down for that, and you just kind of find a slightly sweeter spot wherever you think that's. So something like that, I hope, very subtly helps draw a little bit more attention. Yeah, I'm looking at it small, I think the vignette's too strong, but again, I could just bring that back and just nudge that. But the fact is you'd already vignetted it, so probably doesn't need that. So really then, Nadia, I think your main thing with this photo is that essentially I think you got in just that little bit too close. I think just a little bit of space around the edges makes a bit of difference. And the same thing applies if you were to just go for the chicks. That again, you would crop it, but have a little bit more around the bottom. I suppose just to, let's go right back to the original picture like this, that, if you were to just have the chicks and we were to crop there, again, it just feels slightly too pressed in. You either need to be closer in, or you would need to have just that little bit of extra space around it just to kind of make it feel slightly more comfortable. So I hope that makes sense, Nadia, that really, like I say, always there's a sense of when we're taking photos that very, very often we're either just a bit too close in or we're just a bit too far out. And I think sometimes, so if you're not sure, shoot from slightly further out so that you can crop in, because it's harder to add in afterwards. Well, I mean, obviously we're adding in afterwards with generative fill, but I think in an ideal world you want to have as much control over it as you can. But, I mean, really cute photo. I absolutely understand why you went for it. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas, a little bit of thought there. What have we got here? A couple of comments. Oh, April says, "Oh, they are so cute." Viji says, "Oh, such a beautiful shot, warm and cute." I'm wondering if a bokeh shot could bring me even more attention to the subjects. The blades of grass stand out as well. Well, yes, this is true. That actually in that. Well, okay, let's just flip open that photo again, just to kind of talk about this. Because yes, if you were able to get yes, the problematic bit here is the fact that, first of all, Nadia is using her phone. The second bit is the fact that the mother duck is further back than the chicks and the ducklings. And therefore, actually, if you were to, you couldn't have both of them in focus and all the grass out of focus. So yeah, focus is another way of isolating your subject, but in this particular case, I think it would have been extraordinarily difficult to do for Nadia to do that, because essentially, like I said, although on a flat level the duck is sitting straight above it, we know that actually the duck is sitting behind the chicks as well. I mean, this is another thing as well, which is possible. If I think, Nadia, if maybe you've got a little bit lower, if that had at all been possible, so that in essence, the gap between the duck and the chicks would have been less. So if you sort of sunk just a bit lower, maybe even at this point, if you take your phone and you turn it upside down so the camera bit is down at ground level and kind of lower it down, that can sometimes get you into that sort of slightly more intimate, closer place than if you're, I mean, clearly with this you're not standing up. I'm guessing that you probably were squatting down, but you could sometimes get lower if you actually just turn your phone upside down. But yeah, no, the bokeh kind of trying to get the soft focus, I think, would have been just about impossible in that situation, unless you had some, big professional gear rather than your phone. But I understand where you were coming from, Viji. So, Viji says, you were there right at the right moment and fortunate to have witnessed it. Yeah, it's a lovely thing, that. Okay, right, so thank you for that, Nadia. Hope that gives you a couple of ideas. Right, okay, next up then, we're going to go to Viji. And Viji sent me a handful of photos. And, oh, what's happened there? That's opened. That wasn't quite where I wanted it to open. So let me just, I'm going to have to specify that I want to open that in the photos. Right, so Viji said, basically, recently there was a flower show which was held in Chennai for a week. My college friend and I went to this show and I took some photos in my iPhone. I'm sending the pics here for your critique, particularly the composition part. I didn't have time to edit, the cables will be seen. So here's one of them. So what we can see is we've got this kind of giant crocodile kind of creature here, all flowers. Anyway, Viji goes on, composition plays a very important part, but every inch was covered with people. And it was really tough to shoot without including all the people. Let me know what you think, or if, what you feel might have been a better way of taking the photos. So we've got this crocodile here, from a slightly different angle coming round, get a slightly better sense of it. Here, Viji's created the length of it. Then there's a train here, got somebody there doing a selfie in front of the train, which I really quite like that. I think that's kind of fun. And that's without the selfie person, but then we've got, but there's people in the background. And I think there's always going to kind of, well, as you say, you know, there's a problem of what do you do with people in the background. I know last year there was a vintage car show in the car park across the room. Across the road, not across the room, across the road, in the car park. There was a vintage car show, and I went out there with my phone and I was taking lots of photos, but it was packed, and every shot I took, there's people around it, and it does make it very difficult. The other thing is you are completely stuck with kind of the light you've got. Obviously, on a day like this, it's an overcast day, and so there's limits to what you can do with the light. I think in this kind of situation, it becomes a case of the kind of photos you're likely to get are more likely to be, hey, I was here memories, hey, I was here photos or memory photos to remind you that you were here, or things to just shove up and say, oh, look what's going on, rather than particularly the award-winning photo that, you know, was printed in magazines. Especially when you've got other people around. But there's still the case of what do I do in order to maximise what I'm capable of getting. And I think in this case, in a way, you know, it does become, I mean, the train, you've got most of the train in. Again, maybe you want a little bit more room in front of it rather than behind it. Or you create stories, and this is a good example of a story whereby, okay, there's other people about. Can you create the story of the notion of the people interacting with the flower show? And I think this is a good example of that. Here, I can see you're trying to capture the whole, but because it's actually a very busy image, it's not that easy to particularly to be able to isolate it. So in that sense here, you know, you're up against exactly the same problem like we just had with Nadia and the ducks, that you've got your iPhone, you're not going to be able to create a nice bokeh shot. It's too far away to be able to use to stand back and use the zoom and create a shallow depth of field. And then we've got all the trees behind it, we've got all the flowers in front. This is really one of those things to be experienced, to be there. So trying to capture the whole crocodile, like I say, like this, you know, fine, it's, you've got a sense of it, but you're never going to quite have the awarding in front. Again, another thing here, Viji, again, a bit like the train, you've got more space behind it than you have in front, and generally speaking, as a kind of default, unless there's very good reasons why not, as a default, you want to kind of make sure that you have more space in front of the subject than behind. So in the case of the train, a little bit more space in front of the train than behind it. In the case of the crocodile, a little bit more space in front of it rather than behind, because with composition in photos, generally speaking, you want to have a sense of the subject moving into the photo and having space to move into the photo. Because otherwise what happens is we get drawn to the head and we kind of ignore the back, and then we're kind of wasting a lot of the space of the photo. But I think the other option here, if you can't do the stories, is the kind of getting close bit. Now this is getting in a bit close, but I think it's that bit where if you really can, you know, you try and get in where the tooth, and you kind of make a point of particular aspects, particular details within it. Now, I also understand that by the look of it, this is fenced off as well, precisely to stop people climbing all over the flowers. So always, again, limitations on what you can do. I mean, phones have just come on so absolutely phenomenally, but for the most part, they are still fairly stuck at, you know, if you can get a 2x zoom, which isn't starting to kind of break up a bit, you're doing quite well. I think the next big revolution in photography that they really need to do is start developing a really good zoom, not a digital zoom, because a digital zoom is no good. A digital zoom is exactly the same as having, you may as well just put it onto your computer and then zoom in. You're not getting anything extra using the digital zoom on one of these, and very often it sort of does weird things to it as well. So yes, I think basically your tricky bit here is the fact that I don't think under these circumstances, with this kind of lighting and with all the people around, you're ever going to be able to really capture a kind of like the award-winning photo. So what you try and do then, I think, is you try and look for the stories. And the stories are either going to be in the detail, if you can get in close and isolate particular areas, or it's going to be in the interaction with. And actually, I think this is where, in a way, street photography, start thinking street photography, that it's not just about the space, it's about how the people are moving within the space. And I think if we go back to your photo of the woman here, doing a selfie against the train, I think that's kind of fun. Now, interestingly, you say about like having the cables, we can see the cable running through here. Now, if you actually have Photoshop, let's open that with Photoshop a moment. Photoshop has now got to a point whereby you can in fact get rid of, so if we can see here, we got the cable running across the picture. Now, normally, if we wanted to get rid of it, we'd have to come in and we'd have to kind of, you know, maybe play around with patch tools and all the rest of it. But Photoshop latest version has now got this thing. If we go to this tool here, which is the remove tool, and there's a bit up here which says find distractions, and you can have a one-click removal, and you can actually type in. But sorry, let's just cancel that. I clicked that too quickly. Find distractions, and you can do people, and you can do wires and cables. So it will actually look out for wires and cables. So if I click on wires and cables, it will in fact remove those. So let's just see what happens. Yeah, there we go, just like that. Cable, no cable, cable, no cable, and it's done an extraordinarily good job. Move across. I'm not aware of. Yeah, so for one click, it's, so it doesn't always work absolutely, but in this case it has. So there's, the Photoshop is kind of constantly trying to make it easier and easier and easier for you to be able to edit and to take the hard work away from you. So if you happen to have the latest version, I don't know whether Elements does, but certainly the proper version, the big version, does. So that's another little extra there for you, Viji. I hope that all makes sense. Okay, comments here. Where are we? Oh, Nadia says, thank you. I will experiment with what you suggested. Meg says, oh, wow, that's amazing. April says, cool alligator with flowers. I can see that in Florida. Viji says, that's my friend. Ah, it's your friend who's taking the photo. Okay. Said, tried bokeh, but too many colours and it was jarring. Yeah, it would just be really difficult to do with your phone. Jeffrey says, I find some of the better photos require me to squat down, raising my camera pointing down, not all at eye level. Yes, absolutely. I mean, generally speaking, standing up and shooting things at eye level rarely gives you the best photo. Your options are either to kind of squat down. It's certainly, we've talked before about this notion of if you're ever photographing children or you're photographing pets, get down to their level. I think I've related this story before, but not everybody will hear it or heard it or remember it. But I have a friend who's a landscape photographer, and he's 6 foot tall. And I remember the first time I saw he'd sort of shot a wedding for a friend. And I suddenly realised everything he'd shot from the viewpoint of someone who's 6 foot tall. And I knew that because I'm not. I'm only 5'6" or 5'5". So everything just looked a little bit too high. And I thought it hasn't occurred to him that not everybody sees the world at exactly his height. But of course he does landscape photography where it very, very rarely ever matters that much whether you're up or down a foot, you know. So yes, generally speaking, think about the idea of getting lower. Also, what's in the background. Sometimes you can isolate a subject slightly better by getting down and maybe having the sky behind it. Now, in the case of your flowers, Viji, there was a lot of trees around the place and there wasn't a way to isolate it in the same kind of way. The other thing as well is actually if you lean over and you get a direct shooting down, which can sometimes be fun on particular aspects as well. Obviously, couldn't do that with something like the crocodile. What else have we got? Viji says, wow, I never knew that. I think that's about the cable remove tool. April says, wow, that feature is great, Kim, the new removal tool. And Viji says, thanks. Okay, great. Well, where are we at? So, yes, just a little reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like as well. If you're enjoying this podcast, then click the like down below. The algorithms always quite like it if you hit the like. And also, for that matter, if you happen to be watching this back and you're not actually watching it live, you can also leave a comment. If there's any thoughts here, I will eventually get notified of the comments usually. So if there's a particular question you wanted to ask or something you just thought was worth adding to the conversation, please do. I mean, there's, this is episode 231, so there's 230 other podcasts back to the thing, and periodically people do go back and look at them. So if there's extra comments added, then they can show up. And if you feel like you've got something that is worth adding to any of these podcasts, then please do. These podcasts are to be a resource for anybody who's interested in developing their photography. So fine, the majority of this is me, but it's not just me, it's our community, and everybody kind of, the more feedback we get, the better. Right, okay, so what we will do now then is we will move on to the next one, which is Janet. Now, actually, I will just double check here. No, okay, first of all, what I do need to say then, Janet, is now Janet sent me a raw file, except she did it through Google Drive, and I didn't get the permissions. I sent back, it said, oh, you need permission to be able to open this file. And so I zapped you back, I filled in the thing, Janet, to say, oh, please give me the permission to download it. But you haven't, which means I'm guessing that somehow the system hasn't worked to be able to give you that. So unfortunately, I don't have your raw file to be able to work with these, which is a bit of a shame because I think that might have helped a little bit. However, I sent it last night, I sent it again this morning. I'm also aware that there's a time difference between here and Ottawa. So, it's still going to be fairly early in the morning where you are. And unfortunately now it's just a bit too late for this podcast. But let's make a little start. Well, so let's flip over, wrong that one, there we go. So here's one of the photos from Janet, and Janet says, this image was an attempt at panning skaters on the Rideau Canal, the world's largest skating rink, a UNESCO heritage site, last weekend in Ottawa. One of my photography groups had a weekly challenge for motion blur with a Sunday deadline. Due to time limits, I had to do a quick iPad edit, and it was easier to do a black and white conversion, actually, because, not that one, sorry, there we go. So here was Janet did another one, black and white conversion, rather than to try and correct the colour on the iPad. Having now done a full edit on the computer, which takes us back to this one. Janet can't decide whether she prefers the black and white version or the colour version. Okay, well, I think, like I said, not having the original one, I don't know how much you've cropped in, I don't know what space you had, I don't know what else was in the background at the time. I think it's, black and white can definitely add a mood, but one of the things I kind of can't help but feel with this particular edit is that it feels very, I mean, yes, I've talked about the idea of we want to have more space. I was just talking to Viji there, we want to have more space in front of the subject, but this is so much space in front that actually there's like no space behind. And so the balance isn't quite there. So if you think kind of about your notion of the rule of thirds, the rule of thirds, obviously it's not a rule, it's a guideline, and I've always hated the fact that it's called a rule, but that aside, as a guideline, it's quite a reasonably good guideline. And when we look at your other photo, this one here, you have done, your skater sits there on a third, and I think actually as a balance, it's a better balance. I also do quite like the colour. I mean, I think the black and white can be nice and moody. In this case, because your skater is primarily black and white, apart from those little splashes of red with the Canada leaf and colouring just added to it, I think it works quite well. Now, panning shots, for anybody who's not tried it, are extraordinarily difficult. Yeah, you give it a go by all means, but your hit rate tends to be quite low, because what you have to do is you're looking for motion blur that's in camera, but you've got to move the camera at the same speed that your subject is moving. So in the case of the ice skater or a cyclist or a runner or anything like that, as they're moving across the screen, you have to be able to go click, and you need a longer exposure, which also means if it's daytime, that's going to make it trickier, because actually to have a longer exposure you might end up just having too much light getting into the lens and everything's going to overexpose. So you need a kind of a dull light. You'll need to have a really narrow aperture, a really high ISO, in order to be able to try and get your shutter speed down to something like 1/4 of a second, or maybe half a second if you can. Certainly anything less than 1/10 of a second isn't really going to do it much. So, or faster than 1/10 of a second rather. So, and then what you've got to do is you've got to kind of, you can't click and then move. You kind of have to follow the subject and then kind of click as you're following it. And you're trying to keep the subject in absolute focus and move at exactly the same speed while not wobbling the camera up and down at the same time. So this is much harder than patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time, or chewing gum and walking. This kind of multitask thing, it requires a lot of practice, a lot of coordination. I'm not even going to attempt to try and do it, or to try. I mean, I've one or two goes at doing this, and I've never been in enough of a situation whereby I could really give it a go, to be honest. So it's not my speciality. But hats off to you here. I think the fact that you've managed to get this much of the skater in focus is really quite impressive. What I do tend to feel with this, though, in the same way that I was talking about the ducks, is actually there's a bit here whereby you've cropped in close, but I tend to feel that it's well, again, depending on if you've got a zoom, then actually getting in closer like that can be even more fun. It kind of really makes you feel that little bit more intimate. Or, depending on how much space you've got in the background, this is one of those which would really work well with a very wide background. Let me just kind of close these other ones for a moment. And let me just show you what I mean by this, is that I think if we were to take something like this and actually really expand it out a bit, only again to place your skater on that kind of sense of a third, and actually just, and I don't quite know what the generative expand is going to do here, but we'll place your skater there and then do the generative expand and see what it actually comes up with. But sometimes with this, what you could do is sort of try and create that kind of minimalism or negative space kind of feel. Now this is interesting. This is throwing in backgrounds, all sorts of funny different backgrounds. Don't like the fact it's added the green at all. Maybe that one's slightly better. I think I might just hit generate again and see if it gives me anything better. But again, it's back to this problem of not knowing. Not having seen the rest. I don't know what you were working with. There could have been a whole bunch of skaters in the back. Oh, now it's adding mountains and fields by the look of it. All right, and we've now got a jogger. Oh dear, right, that's not really doing it. But let's say we went with something like that. I was kind of hoping for something a little bit lighter, but you kind of get a sense, I think, of more space. So I'm just going to have to hit generate one more time and just see if it's going to give me anything better, because I don't like. Again, the problem of generative expand is not always going to. Oh, good God, that's awful. Okay, I'll tell you what. One last thing. Let's go back to here. Let's create this, and then let's just lighten it. Curves. So let's say we just something slightly brighter, slightly more muted, and then just I have to put that back on full. I just want to kind of get rid of that line there and just kind of blend it a little bit. But yeah, something like that maybe. But actually, well, so I'm getting too caught in this. I should be with you. You are the focus here. Apologies. But I think actually something like this, really what I'm saying is I think more space around the skater, I think actually adds to this. There's something about that notion of the skater, and if you're trying to get that notion, because skating, I think it's a similar thing if you're trying to photograph cyclists as well, getting difficulty with what's going on around it. But certainly with a skater, if there's a lot, you're talking about this being like one of the largest skating areas. Obviously, like I said, I don't know who else was in the background, but that sense, I think, of space around them really gives it. And then actually in this case, because you've got those little splashes of red on the clothing, I think that then really allows it to work that little bit more. Although, like I say, I would have preferred a paler background, more in keeping with the ice your skater happens to be on. But I hope that kind of makes sense there, Janet. So basically what we're saying here is that this feels too tight over on the right. I quite like the contrasts. Again, this will work better, but I think this one, like this one, would just work better expanded out. But I hope that gives you a couple of ideas there, Janet. But yeah, thank you for sending that in. Where do we go? Boom, 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 boom. Oh, Janet says she missed seeing that notification. Yeah, I figured you probably would. Right, looks like I use different images as well. Didn't realise that until seeing them back to back. Yes. Nadia says I like the colour one. Viji says I like the colour one too. April says honestly both black and white coloured is nice. Janet says I've tried practicing panning using weekly bicycle races in the summer. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, if you've got that going on, then that's, yeah. Says I've got a wider image from Monday, different lighting and background, and also shot from ice level. Well, that could be interesting. I'll post that one in the Flickr group when I get it uploaded. Yeah, that's a really nice idea. Oh, Janet says it's a 7.8 kilometre long canal. So wow, what's that? That's 5 miles. Well, gosh, that's a long canal, yeah. And Viji says skating should be so much fun, I think. Looking forward to check your image on Flickr, Janet. Yeah, actually, there's a wee point there. Let's just, not that one. Where are we? That one. Just, again, a little reminder here that we have the Flickr group. The Flickr group, flickr.com/groups/UPwKA. The UPwKA obviously being Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. And so please start using the Flickr group. We still have to develop it properly at the moment. There's only about a dozen or so members, but it's a place which I really kind of want to develop. So, if you're sticking images in for challenges or you want feedback, but it's also not just a case of putting in images for feedback here on the broadcast, on the podcast, but to actually, if you want to just sort of get a general sort of sense from your peers, from the other members of the group, and say, I put this in looking for a little bit of feedback on it, if you could let me know. Always, though, if you are asking for feedback, try and be as clear as you can about the kind of feedback you're looking for. Because always with the photo, there's different ways you can go about it, and depending on what it was you were hoping to achieve with a photo, that makes it much easier for people to tell you how they might have seen the way they're doing it. Also, in the Flickr group, there's a kind of smug moments place there as well, which is if you want to be able, so maybe you've got a photo that you're just really pleased with and you want to share it with the group. There's another place, you can do it with that as well. So yeah, use the Flickr group, develop it, use it between podcasts. Also a place if you're wanting to ask questions, if there's something that's particularly you're interested in or you're confused about and you'd like to raise that as well, it could well end up getting included in the podcast as well. And I try and keep the Smug Points up to date on that one as well. So yeah, do use that. What's this? Janet says people use the skating on the canal for commuting. Wow. Viji says, a quicker way to commute. Yeah, well, gosh, yeah, skate to work. I presume you've got to be living and working both fairly near the canal. Yeah, but what a fun idea that one is. Right, okay. So, on to then Robert. Now, Robert in Texas, although I don't think he's in Texas at the moment. I think Robert and Anna, I don't know whether they're still trekking about in Egypt. They were last week. But yes, Robert sent an image in for when we did the best of 2025. Best of 2024 back in the last. So it was either the last podcast of 2024 or the first one of 2025. I've kind of forgotten which. He put this one in and basically saying that he'd been getting a lot. He'd had a lot of good feedback from it, and I think he'd have done quite well in camera club competitions. And I was looking at it. But I was immediately struck with a sort of sense that to me it felt kind of two things. Well, one, it was sort of felt a bit overcooked. And the other was it didn't feel like there was as much range. It felt like everything was a bit too dark and there wasn't enough contrast between the light and dark. And so the image became slightly confusing. However, because we were doing a best of, which was more about a kind of celebration of how we were feeling about the images, it wasn't really the place to come in and start giving critique. But Robert picked up on my hesitation in the podcast and then sent me a message afterwards saying, well, look, actually, if you could give me some feedback on this, it'd be really appreciated. Now, I meant to, and I was going to, except for the fact, to go back to what I said at the beginning, the computer was at this point started playing up and I haven't felt confident enough in the idea of doing a podcast and opening up Photoshop and making a difference to it, editing in Photoshop and doing the podcast at the same time. So there's been a kind of a bit of a delay with that. So now we're back in space. I thought, well, okay, let's kind of talk you through the kind of thing I was thinking of. So what we have here then is clearly a kind of rugby game going on and lots of mud and splattering. And they're in the scrum, everything's kind of building up, and our attention gets drawn to the guy with the mouth guard just kind of coming out here. But I'd also noticed there were a couple of interesting little faces just kind of popping through here as well. So I just felt that there was maybe a lot more or other things that you could maybe do with this. So anyway, Robert was great. He sent me through the raw file, and if I can just find that. Let's just double click on that, and what we see here is this is the original. So we can see that it's cropped in. We can also see it's quite colourful, that there's reds and greens as well as whites and everything else going on here. But what do we do? Now, Robert cropped this into a square format, thereby cropping out basically, because you can see here that with the guy, especially the guy wearing the red and then a splash of white here, that draws your attention over to the right-hand side of the photo, whereas actually what Robert had really been looking at was this guy here. We can also see that the faces that I was pointing out earlier down here are very, very dark. So they are completely lost in shadow. So just at a very basic point, as we open this up in Camera Raw, what I will do is I'm going to bring the exposure up a little bit because we're going to sort of play around, and I'm going to take the shadows and I'm going to bring the shadows up. Now when I bring the shadows up, we can see here that actually we can start to see a little bit more what's going on with these faces tucked into the scrum. You see from there to there, and that's giving us potential. So the idea here is it's not that we're lacking contrast now, but that's okay because we're going to bring the contrast back in afterwards. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead with the editing. So with the raw file, what I really want to do is I want to bring up the exposure. Obviously I don't want to bring it up so much so that we get whiting out, because that's going to ruin other effects. But if I don't want it too dark either, so I'm just going to nudge that up so that I can darken it down a bit later while still having the detail in the shadows. However, by doing this, one of the things that's starting to happen is it is starting to get slightly more noisy. Always happens when the more you edit, the more noise gets introduced into the picture. So just at this point, I'll go to the detail, and I'll just nudge the luminance up just a little bit, 15 or something like that, and then click OK. That should now open here. Just close Janet's skater there. So we're starting with this. This is our kind of starting point. Now, okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in for the crop. Now, you could go for the square crop. I tend to feel with something like this, when you've got the scrum going on, I kind of want a little bit more width. So the way I would tend to do is say, well, okay, we'll put it onto crop, but I'm going to hold down the shift key. And when I hold down the shift key, this means that it sort of sticks to the same kind of proportions. And I'm going to bring that in from here, and then I'm going to bring it in from here, and just kind of, because we don't necessarily need because the feet and the knees have already been cut off, I think we can actually bring this up to a kind of thigh calf level on here, and then maybe just nudge that up a little bit here. And now we've got our, what are we doing here? Sort of something, yeah, I think that's probably, we've got the guy in the background here, but he's staying out of focus. And I think something like that as an initial crop, see where we're at. Now, we do have the problem of the fact that this shirt is really quite bright, but we will play around with that again afterwards. So what do we do from here then? Well, we know what we're going to be doing is converting, well, we could kind of stick with the colours. And one of the advantages about the colour is the fact that it does kind of help separate out. If we go back to your original photo here, Robert, and look at here, I think everything's kind of muddying into the same tonal range. I don't think that there's enough variation. You want to actually have the variation so that we can make out what's different. And the whites and then the dark blue or blacks of the shorts and the greens and what have you are creative, but at the same time, the colours aren't necessarily giving us that much. The guy at the back with his red shirt here and the number 9 here are tending to kind of grab the attention more than we're wanting. So we're going to assume that we're going to drop this into black and white. Now, if we're going to drop this into black and white, I know almost instinctively from training that because these two guys down here are in the shadows, that will get lost again. They will disappear. So I'll just duplicate that layer for a moment. And what I will do is I'm going to go to the dodge tool, and I'm going to use the midtones, and I've got this sitting about 9 at the moment. And I'm just going to lighten up these faces down here. Now, the fact that this guy in here has slightly darker skin, to begin with, there's a whole kind of political thing here, which I'm feeling, you've kind of got to be slight. There was, several years ago, you might remember the O.J. Simpson case and what have you, and there was a massive controversy where different magazines actually darkened his skin or lightened his skin, almost depending on whether they thought he was guilty or not. It was absolutely horrific. But you kind of got to be aware of that. This has got nothing to do with feelings about whether somebody's skin colour could be lighter or not. It's about whether they could be seen in a black and white photo. And in this case, so I'm just wanting to kind of lighten up this little area down here. And you will note it now, at the moment, again, when you use the dodge and burn tool, the dodge and burn tool also tends to intensify the colour. We can see that the reds in the skin are now looking much stronger than the skin tones anywhere else. So that's not quite right. But that will disappear once we go into black and white. Now, a standard kind of black and white here, if I just go to hue saturation and drag the saturation down, yeah, I'm not really so keen on that. The reds and the greens are kind of becoming similar. There's not enough delineation between the different colours. So with this, I'm going to go back into Camera Raw. So let's just actually get rid of that. And I'll duplicate this layer again so you can see the difference. If I go to So we'll go to filter, we'll go to camera raw, and we'll go to black and white. And the thing about using the black and white here, which it looks virtually identical to what we did just desaturating, but we've now gives us a black and white mixer just here. And the black and white mixer allows us to now shift each of the colours. So if I take the reds, remember they were wearing, there was sort of red on. So if I do the reds become lighter or darker, depending on what you're wanting. Now actually what I might do is just nudge the reds up a little bit, make them slightly lighter. The orange, that's where there's a lot of colour going on. You see all the skin tones in this photo basically seem to be sitting in the orange range. Or maybe just nudge that up a little bit, and that again helps to bring. Now you see it over here, the faces aren't looking as cooked as it was when I did the earlier on. Then let's see. So let's run through what other colours we got. The yellows, virtually nothing in the yellows. We'll just leave them. Greens. Now the greens, interestingly, because there's greens on the shirt lines here. So where do we want the greens? Do we want the greens light, or maybe we bring them down dark just to kind of create a little bit of contrast? The aquas, that's playing with the greens as well, although actually I quite like it when they get lighter. So, and then the blues, not a lot going on in the blues, a little bit in the shorts down here. In fact, maybe I'll just take that down a little bit. Purples, again, not a lot in the purples, and magentas, practically nothing. But I think this now is giving us a kind of a nicer mix than we would have had. And importantly here is we've got the contrast going on. If we go back to here, you know, that there's not enough, it's kind of feeling too busy here. Now, we're also aware of the very light patch up here, which we don't really need. So the next thing I'm going to do is we could just simply take a curves, drop that down, make everything a bit darker, except for the fact we don't want everything darker. So again, using the mask, I'll just fill that back in and then come over here and then paint it back in, and just sort of gently darken down. So that the strong white on this guy's shirt, pull that down a bit. Maybe that's right. I'll drop that down to 50% so I can then do it a couple of times. We can maybe take down, create a little bit of shadow just down here and just on the edges. So we're sort of vignetting, but more than that. By darkening this, we're allowing, excuse me, we're allowing the texture, the backs of these parts of the scrum to kind of come up. Also got to be slightly careful that I don't want to lose these guys, because I just love those faces just poking through as a little extra. It's like you don't notice them straight away, but then you kind of notice them coming on afterwards. Now I've got that, I'm going to select all of these and put them onto a separate layer. And then what I want to do is, now the thing is with your texture is, I think, Robert, the problem was that the texture was overkill. So if we take this into, excuse me, I can feel my voice disappearing as we're talking. If we go to the effects, if I whack up the clarity and I whack up the texture, we kind of end up with the effect that you've got here. And a little bit like I talked about with Nadia, when you're going to do this, you don't want to do it across the whole picture, because actually the bokeh that you had with the guy in the background going out of focus and the club bit there, they end up getting texturized too. So we don't want to do that. So let's just take that back to 0. But what we could do is we can select it. We can do a sort of selection of that. So what I want to do is I want to actually have some of the texture but brought back into where the key faces are, maybe where some of the mud is. So I'm going to bring that up, maybe a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, but I don't want it over everything. So now I'm going to click OK, but I'm going to mask it again. So now with the mask, I'll place this back here, and keeping with the 50% or so I'm just going to start painting in on the face, on these faces down here, on the hair, on little bits of the mud on the skin. And so we get, especially on the backs of those shirts, where we're getting a little bit more texture kind of coming. So you can now feel the mud. You can get the sense of the mud, but it's not kind of we've still got the shirts underneath. And I think just painting, so I'm not touching the background here. I'm not touching this guy back here. I'm not touching where the club is. I'm could maybe even put a little bit on the, I won't actually, yeah, maybe touch on the edge of his shorts here. And again, we'll allow that, but we can soften that bit out. Then what I might do, I think at this point, I'm feeling quite a lot happier with this. Might even darken down that corner again a little bit more. So we'll take another curves thing, just pull that down again, mask that off, and then paint that back in over here. Just kind of darken down that corner a bit more, something like that. And again, maybe even down here, something like that. Now what we need to do is just double check the levels, because the levels can sometimes, you know, take a look at the histogram. We've got that. Now actually you can kind of bring that up a fraction. Or what I might do, in fact actually, I quite like this as it is now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just check the contrast, so brightness contrast, because actually I think if we grab the contrast, yeah, a little bit more contrast here, I think then kind of, so we've used the texture tool to really bring out the texture in where we want to direct it, but I think we can get a little, because we've got the whites of the shirt and the darks of the mud, we can add a bit more contrast here, make it look more photographic, and I quite like that. I think that works well. And then probably don't, if I go back to the levels, yeah, you can see that's fine, that goes to the end. So this is what we end up with overall. Now maybe I'm just a fraction too dark down here, so I might just take out a little bit of those. Where are we? Yeah, take a little bit of the darkness down there. But I think overall then, Robert, that this ends up a more balanced kind of photo. Actually, we'll just darken down this guy a little bit here so that those whites aren't grabbing quite so much. So we still have this picture now where the scrum leads up to our guy with here. The faces down here, for anybody who wants to look and find a little bit of extra, it's almost like a little Easter egg for somebody who's spending a bit more time. I do love those faces. We can see them much more clearly. The out of focus guy in the background and the club logo and stuff like that are staying out of focus without feeling over. And now we don't have that sense of it feeling overcooked. So I think what we've got is we've got the essence of what you were going for with the photo, but it now I think feels much more like the action photo. Whereas when I look at this, unfortunately, all I see is the edit. And we can see here now, sorry, I accidentally hit open Evernote by mistake. Well, we can see here, you know, that, like I say, it's just very busy, not enough range. Whereas back here now, we've got much more of the tonal range, but we still have all that sense of action that's going on. So I hope that helps. I've got, you know, various levels and layers and what have you, but they're worth playing with, and because it's a really strong photo, Robert. I can see, you know, you've had a lot of positive response from it because it's a, you know, it is a good photo, but I think something like this really kind of helps enhance that. So I hope that makes sense. But it's a really interesting photo, and thank you very much for sending that one in. Okay, a couple of comments here. April says, oh yes, this one by Robert is a good catch. Viji says, I remember this shot, great shot. Viji says she also likes the editing. This kind of attention to detail amazes me. Susan says, a masterclass in Photoshop, brilliant. And Nadia says, I agree, Susan. Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you to Janet, to Nadia, to Robert, and to Viji for all sending in images. I hope that each of you have found something useful in what I've said, but also I hope that everybody else watching it has found something useful and feel that they can apply to their own photos too. And that's the real power of this. Also, on a Smug Points level, everybody who sent in an image to get feedback gets a bonus 25 Smug Points. Hey, there you go. So that will make a difference to the Smug Points leaderboard as well. Right, okay, so don't run off yet. We've still got, I will tell you what's coming up over the next few weeks, because we're now into a new month, March. We survived February. Woohoo! So what we have coming up, well, actually, first of all, a couple of little interesting things here. For anybody who's sort of local or local-ish to Castle Douglas, Dumfries and Galloway, this corner of Scotland, On Thursday, this coming Thursday, 6th of March, I'm going to be giving a talk on the art of storytelling in photography. That's going to be held in Castle Douglas down at the Crannog, which is like a wee centre down at the edge of the loch, of Carlin Walk Loch. And so that's at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. So Thursday to 6, 7 o'clock. So if you happen to be about, or you know anybody locally who is likely to be about, who you think might be interested, I'm giving this. It's free. It's a free talk on the art of storytelling in photography. So hope you can make it along to that. Now, there's a whole project that I'm kind of getting involved with the Crannog. That talk is sort of part one. And another thing I'm going to be doing is just a little bit over a week later, on the 15th, Saturday the 15th, in the afternoon from 2 till 4, also at the Crannog, is I'm going to be running a mobile phone workshop. So your phone photography, okay, how to get the most out of this thing. And it is open to absolutely anyone. So if you think there's anyone who, because I mean, yeah, there's all the usual photography workshops with how to use your camera. This is about how to maximize the use of this, the camera we always have on us. So that will be a hands-on practical workshop. I'll do a little bit of talking about it, but then we will essentially be going out into the field if it's not pouring with rain. If it is, then we'll do bits indoors. But I'm going to kind of give people a better idea of what they can be doing with their phone. So on the 6th of March, there's a talk, the art of storytelling in photography. On the 15th of March, the hands-on phone photography practical workshop. Those are both at the Crannog in Castle Douglas. So if you know anybody about that, if you can spread the word a bit, or if you happen to be living locally enough to come along to it, then please do. Now, in terms of the podcasts that are coming up, one quick thing to remind you all of is that Janet sent me a message this morning, I think it was, or yesterday, reminding me that in the North America, the clocks go forward next week. Okay, so spring forward. But here in the UK, they don't go forward until the 30th of March. Okay, so please bear that in mind, that what it means is for next week and the week after and the week after. So on the 9th of March, the 16th of March and the 23rd of March, for those of you in North America, we're going to be an hour shifted. And off the top of my head, I can't remember which way. I think it basically means that it will be an hour earlier where you are, but just Google it, absolutely Google it. The fact that it's going to, but by the time we get to the 30th of March, we'll be back in sync again. We'll be back to this usual hour time. But of course, when we get to the 30th of March, we move forward an hour. Viji, you in India, we're going to be at that kind of changed slot again as well. So again, I can't remember if it's an hour later or an hour earlier for you. I think it ends up being an hour later for you. So yeah, heads up with that. I'll try and remember to put something into the Flickr group and the Facebook group to remind you of that. So in terms of what's coming up in the podcasts, so what have we got? So next week, I'm going to be talking about capturing movement, because this was Nadia, when you said, right, you won the most Smug Points for the accumulated January, February. What challenge would you like to see? She should have said about the notion of movement. And I thought, well, I've occasionally done stuff about slow shutter speeds, but really movement can be something which is high shutter speed, slow shutter speed, or for that matter, panning as well. If we look at Janet's photo earlier, when a photograph is a frozen image, a frozen moment in time, how do you encapsulate that idea so you feel like you're looking at an image, a moving image as such? So that's what we're going to be looking at next week, with the idea then of setting the challenge for 2 weeks after that. So on the 23rd of March will be the Capturing Movement Challenge. So next week I talk all about it, then I give you the 2 weeks to go away and try and find your own versions. In between, there's another idea here, because in fact Nadia won the December Smug Points Challenge, and we never got around to doing it, which is the notion of photographing people from different heights and angles. So to go back to Jeffrey's point of actually squatting up and down and changing your angle and height, that there's a tendency to photograph other people again from eye level. but it can change quite dramatically, whether it's like with kids getting down low to their level, or dogs or pets or whatever, or just quite simply, if you're photographing somebody straight on, but you just slightly shoot from below, or you slightly shoot from above, or you dramatically shoot from above or below, how much does that change? So this was something Nadia was also interested in. So I've decided to finally get round to that one as well. So hopefully then, that means, so on the 9th of March, capturing movement. The 16th of March will be photographing people from different heights and angles. The 23rd of March will be the capturing movement challenge. And then on the 30th of March, I think I will be doing another feedback session. So start thinking about photos that you feel you would like a bit of feedback on, whether it's something you were putting into competition but it never did quite as well as you felt it should, or something you would like to put into a competition but you would really like to get tidied up a bit first, or just a photo that maybe you're doing for family or you're doing for somebody else and you want a second pair of eyes on it, or it's just something that you were trying to get and you ran into problems. Send your image to me, either email it to me, kim@kimairs.co.uk, kim@kimairs.co.uk, or put it into the Flickr group or into the Facebook group and tell me what your sticking points are. So that will be at the end of next month. Right, okay, so I think that pretty much brings us to an end. Like I say, if you find the podcast useful, entertaining, interesting, subscribe, click the like, buy me a coffee. And any last kind of comments here? April says thanks for the heads up. Viji says no to Kim, 7:30 p.m. for us, but that will, remember Viji, that only affects you when our clocks go forward in the UK on the 30th of November, but for everybody in the US and Canada, you're going to notice it next week. Janet says 3 different groups have similar challenges within a couple of months, variations on movement. Okay, well, if you've got that kind of challenge coming up, maybe along with the competition, it's another idea to put stuff in for feedback and critique if you want. April's hoping that I feel better soon. Thank you. Appreciate that. Right, okay, I think that brings us to an end. I do set up that. Thank you ever so much for everybody who sent in the images, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.